Good morning, everyone. I think the time has come for us to get started. Yeah, it's 9:15. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Chuck Ross. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And in case you're wondering, this is a public session to get input on the RAPs, the draft required agricultural practices. And I just want to make a few remarks to get us started today. Then we're going to hear a presentation from Laura DiPietro, who will review the draft and hopefully help you understand what it is the draft is proposing. So my remarks are the following. First of all, thank you for showing up. This is a nice crowd. We're anxious to get your input. You need to understand this is a draft proposal. We haven't even, this isn't anything, formal. We're not taking formal comments yet. There's a whole formal process to write rules that will then be adopted through the legislative process called LCAR. We're not there yet. What you have before you and what you're going to hear about today is a draft RAP proposal. We're anxious to get your candid input. We know we probably don't have it all right. What you should know is that the draft that we're going to be reviewing today reflects the input of farmer groups that we've been dealing with for the last couple of years and other stakeholders to water quality in the state of Vermont. These aren't just our ideas. They actually reflect the thinking of the farming community and others. And they are what I said they are. They're draft required agricultural practices, draft rules. I want to make just a couple of contextual remarks about why this is so important. We're here talking about RAPs that pertain to agriculture. And first of all, let's talk about why we're here. We're trying to figure out how to address the water quality challenges the state is facing. It's most acutely presented in Lake Champlain and bodies of water like Lake Carmi, but it's a problem that's confronting all the waters in the state. And I think it's important to understand that this is an issue that didn't just happen in the last 5 years. It's an issue that's taken decades to create, and everybody in our society has been part of creating that problem. Agriculture included, but residential homeowners, commercial developers, our municipalities, our wastewater treatment facilities, and the list goes on. And the rules that we're talking about today may pertain most clearly to agriculture, but there are actions and activities and proposals and requirements that are going to be required of other aspects of society too. When you talk about Lake Champlain, it's widely recognized through the scientific analysis that's been done that 40% of the phosphorus load in Lake Champlain is attributable to agriculture. But it's also important to recognize that there's another 60% that is not agriculture, and that is the rest of society in Vermont. And all of us are going to have to be part of addressing that issue. Now, why is it particularly important for agriculture to get it right? Because agriculture is such a critical part of our state. We need to help the agriculture community be able to do their job and not impact the waters of the state unnecessarily. And why is that important? And just a few statistics to give you an idea. When you talk about the food system in Vermont and the gross state product, in 2007, food systems represented about $7.6 billion of gross state product. In 2012, it was $10 billion. That's a significant growth in our economy around food systems. It also can be measured in the importance of our agriculture and food systems in the state of Vermont when you look at our food manufacturing facilities that in 2009 numbered 539, and in 2013 they now number 748. That is significant growth in our food system that agriculture is a part of. If you want to look specifically at dairying, it's about $2.2 billion of economic activity a year. Over $3 million a day comes into the state of Vermont from our dairy economy. Dairy represents about 70% of our total agricultural sales in Vermont, and we supply 63% of the fluid milk that's consumed in New England from Vermont. Those are significant statistics that measure the importance of dairying as a part of our economy and our community. And if you look at the other forms of agriculture that we often look at as that locavore, buy local, that diversified ag, these are not all consuming statistics, but to give you a sense, in 2010, we spent about $100 million on local food. In 2014, $189 million in local food. And that's about almost 7% of our food dollars are spent on local food today, up from 5%. I want to provide that kind of statistical background because it's why we find this conversation so important. It's clear we have water quality problems in the state, and it's clear we're dealing with an incredibly important part of our economy and our community that really builds the culture of our state, and that's our agricultural activities and their support for the growth in our food systems in the state. So this is a critical conversation that we need to engage in so we get it right, so our farmers and our food manufacturers and people involved in the food system can do what you do so well and help grow our economy and support our communities and still keep it between the lines, so to speak, on getting water quality right at the same time. That's not going to be easy. I'm not suggesting it's going to be, but that's why we're here. And the required agricultural practices is a representation of what we've been asked to do in the agency, which is to elevate the performance level above the existing AAPs that have been in place since 1995 and elevate them to a higher level of performance so we can do a better job on our water quality. Now, as I said, we're here today in a rough draft stage. We're looking for public input. We want you to be candid. We prefer polite as compared to rude, but we'll take your comments any way we can get them because it's that important for us to really hear what you have to say. We had a hearing on a different topic, but a related topic just a week ago here, and we had some really good input. And we've been actually having some small conversations around the state on the RAPs prior to today, and we've had some really good input. We know we don't have it all figured out, and that's why we're out even at the rough draft stage. So let me welcome you again for being here. Thank you for being here. Welcome your comments, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura DiPietro, who will walk through the proposals that we have. And I just want to highlight that we have some information sheets over on the desk as you walk in. Please take a look at those. We've put them together in the hopes that they'll help you better understand what it is we're proposing in the draft rules. So thanks very much, and over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Chuck. There are also, if you haven't received them, there are handouts that you can write your comments if you don't want to publicly speak. And so there's some of those at the desk there, and then there's also a box on the desk that you could drop those off if you wanted to just kind of be secret about it, which is totally fine. There is an email address I'll show you at the end where you can email comments. If you're going to email any of us, I know some of us have kind of more personal relationships in terms of our personal email at work. Try to send it to the general mailbox so they're all in one spot, please, so that we can make sure we get them. And so basically, I'm going to go through this presentation, and I'm going to hold all comments to the end so that I can make sure I get through it, and then we'll open it up for wide dialogue. If I'm good, this should take 45 minutes, so I'll try and be pretty slick. And I know a number of you have already seen some of these slides in a way. We've worked with a couple of groups up here to start going through this process, as Chuck has mentioned. So this is a little bit more expanded than that, but not too much. All right, so Act 64 was the legislation that passed last year that required the Agency of Ag to update the RAPs. They're due to be finalized by July of this year. And I'll show you what that timeline looks like and how we're working through that timeline right now. You can see that there were some general requirements in Act 64 for us to make sure that we incorporated into the RAPs, and that's the list there. You can see on the bottom of the list, tile drainage. There is a report that we have to do for tile drainage that's due, an interim report that's due this January. And then there's a final report that's due the following January 2017, and then by 2018, we have to figure out which requirements are going to fold into these RAPs at that point in time on tile drain regulations. So stay tuned with that, and as part of that process, Maria, who is right here in the front row, is going to help write that report, and so she'll be talking with people throughout that process to get input into that. So here's the timeline. You can see this is, we released the draft RAPs back in October. We've been doing comment nonstop. We're starting here today, we're starting here today with 10 public meetings statewide, and this is the first one, so congratulations. And tonight there's another one in Enosburg, if any of you are aware of it. It will be the same thing. So if you want to see the show twice, the second show is also free, but it will be the same if you're busy otherwise. From there, once we're going to finalize this, so we'll rewrite a new set of draft RAPs right here in January. That's going to be after we take all this input in that we've gathered. So we won't be changing anything that we've handed out or put up on our website until January. And then there'll be a whole nother process period, which goes on in a formal rulemaking process where we will also then gather comment on that next draft. And then we'll submit them for rulemaking, do more comment, and then also finalize it by July 1. So there's a lot of opportunity for input. This timeline's a little bit tough to see, but this is the box we were just talking about. After we get through that July 1 RAPs are finalized, we have to make a custom manure applicator certification program. That was something that was a set date, which was 45 days after, so about August 15th next year. Small farm certification program begins, and that's July of 2017. Training for all size, small, medium, and large farms begins also in July 2017. And then we have to include tile drainage, as I mentioned, in 2018. So those are some of the deadlines that are already in the law that we have to comply with. And then this is just to show you there's been a lot going on before we got to this point. I mean, a lot of this is input we got for the BNP petition. As Chuck mentioned, there was a discussion last week about that. There's the TMDL, which you've had several presentations as well up here locally about that. And there's been some additional funding, Clean Water Fund, USDA funding, other funding that's come into place. And all of this was ahead of the Ag Work Group, where we spent about a year and a half working with farmers to figure out what is the next step going to be. So hopefully this isn't new to most of all of you, because we have been working on it for a long time, but now the day has come that we're at the draft point. So one thing that's clear, in the world that I live in, I spend a lot of time talking with our partners, and I realize I only spend time talking mostly with the farmers about the responsibility that the farmers have. But everybody else does have a responsibility in all of this, in Act 64 and in the TMDL. And that includes, wastewater treatment facilities. I'll show you a chart. There's some major upgrades that are going to happen. On forest lands, there's also some major upgrades that have to happen. And so it isn't just agriculture that's having to put some effort in to go to the next level. It is everyone. Municipalities in particular are going to be pretty challenged. They've got back roads, their town roads. I'll show you some of the farming that might be very, very, very small scale. There's a lot of work that is falling under their jurisdiction to manage. So this is to show you that this is statewide. And these are the impaired waters. And you can see, down here, my guess is most of this is probably ski resort development related. So those are issues. This may be some logging and forestry. Up here, you tend to have ag these are impaired for agriculture. And so there are impairments in streams, and they determine what the impairment is. And so as I mentioned, like this one might be sediment because of logging. This one might be sediment because of agriculture. And so they do some very thorough assessments. It takes a while to get on this list. This is a very coveted list that takes multiple years of monitoring, both the chemical monitoring and also the biological, so looking at the bugs, to determine that the stream is not healthy, it is not meeting the standards. Before you make this red list, you make the yellow list. And again, so this is a multi-year process to get these lists. And these are the stressed ones. The ones that are on their way to, if they don't turn around, they will become red. But right now, they're just in the stress area. And you can see, this is the developed land. This is the corridor 89, Montpelier to Burlington. There's a lot of folks living in that area and a lot of stormwater challenges all along these. Most of these are all stormwater impairments. So you can see everybody has a role to play. Geographically, some of these roles are a little bit more intense than others, but they're all statewide. And there's the land uses, so you can see, agriculture is the yellow. You can see agriculture, predominantly where we tend to focus is Franklin County, Addison County, Orleans County, and then Orange County has quite a bit as well. And then you've seen this chart before. This just shows you the trends are going up. We have to start turning the trends the other way, and this is kind of why everything has come to this point that we've got to meet these blue lines are our targets on all of these watersheds. And so these are some of the more impaired ones. Missisquoi is definitely much more impaired, and St. Albans than others, and then South Lake. And these three particular ones are predominantly impaired due to agriculture. Because remember I showed you that land use chart. So here are the requirements. As I was mentioning, if you look at wastewater treatment facilities, there's some major upgrades that have to happen here. These are percentage reductions that need to be achieved. Developed land is all this stormwater work. And although these may not seem like really high numbers compared to some of these ag numbers, getting into these areas and retrofitting and trying to deal with some of these stormwater challenges is really, really tough. And it is more expensive in many of these instances. And so this lift, though, may not look like a big number, it is a big challenge for them as well. Production areas, this is just basically they've separated basically the fields with the production areas, and so making sure that basically no one has a discharge in the production area. And then you can see some of these areas, especially up here, we've got a really big lift in terms of agriculture to make some of these water quality goals. And so with all that said, a lot of these there is the Clean Water Fund that can support some of the storm water in some of the towns, the Clean Water Fund. But agriculture has this benefit that there are other programs. The USDA has EQIP, which is a common program that many of you use. And I just want to use this as a plug. The 20th? The 20th, so this week, Friday. USDA office here in St. Albans will be taking applications for another round. And I know that the Agency of Ag has had staff going around to a lot of farms, helping you understand what challenges you might already have under the current rules, let alone these future rules. Please go into USDA and start getting assistance, because you're going to need a couple years of planning, and we need to get that ball rolling. And there are funds there now, and the thing we can't do is return those funds to Washington and have ag not meet its challenge at the same time. And so please go and take advantage of those programs. One thing too, on the sign-up sheet that we have, where you can, not the sign-up sheet, the comment sheet, at the bottom there's a thing that says, do you want assistance to have someone come to your farm? Those folks can also help you get through the process of getting into one of these EQIP programs, or this other one is the state BMP program. They can help you with that too. They've been through it. And one of the things as mentors, hopefully I would love to see, the medium and the large farms in this room and in this area have gone through these programs. And it's not always easy, but it can be done. And they have successfully gone through it and made major upgrades to most of their facilities and operations. We're at the stage now where a lot of small farms do need to go through that same process. So please work together, help each other, encourage each other, because these funds are real funds that can be accessed. Whoops. And then, here's the Clean Water Fund that was just voted on the other day. Basically what it's going to do as a farmer, if you're in this room thinking about what it means to you, there are two different sources of funding that are going to come through the Agency of Ag. One is directly to the farmer through programs like we have the BMP program, if I mentioned that. Also, we could help with grass waterways or other infrastructure, field or production area improvements. So that program that all the programs that we already have are going to basically be enhanced a little bit financially. The other piece is money that'll go to partners to support. So one of the things, for instance, is a lot of farms are needing nutrient management plans, and one component of that is a land treatment plan. So this money will go to support to have people out there to service so that you can get that resource. So that kind of partner grants. There's also, we have 3 contractors in this area, the Farmers Watershed Alliance, the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, and Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. Those 3 entities are also, for instance, being supported to help people get through all of this. Doing a major project upgrade can be daunting, and having someone to help you sort of deal with that piece of it, calling and making sure that everyone's staying on point is really important to make sure a project keeps moving through. So check that box if you want assistance, and we will certainly try and put you in line. And then there's RCPP. Up here, there's quite a big project. It's a whole Lake Champlain Basin, but it's certainly accessible here. Focusing on conserved lands for the most part, because these lands are meant to be in agriculture for good, and we want to make sure that they're protected. So there's additional incentives for farms that are willing to go above and beyond and do a little bit more on conserved land. So here's the meat and potatoes. One of the things we were supposed to do was define what is a small farm. And we broke it into 3. And there's, again, this handout, if you've grabbed it. If you can't read way up there, this handout sort of gives you the summary. But we broke it into 3, being that this first group is those that are very, very small in terms of size, and they would be charged under local zoning. Local zoning always had the authority under structures, like a farm structure that someone wanted to build here. They could determine where it could be sited, but they never had the ability to manage the activities, so plowing or managing manure. Those activities would now be managed by local towns or municipality. And so if you meet that threshold, it's basically if you make less than $2,000 adjusted gross income from farming, and you have less than a set number of animals. And the cow number, for instance, it's 1 to 4 cows. And there's a whole series of numbers that go with that. It's in the more expanded rule if you look there. And so essentially, you know, it's the backyard chickens, it's a lot of that type of agriculture is going to fall into that area. And then we also made this 4-acre threshold, and the reason for that is once you start putting all the setbacks for where you can stack manure or site things in these rules, if you're a farm, you have to have at least 4 acres to meet those minimum standards. So that's where we're saying if you can't meet the standards, then you're below that and not regulated by these rules. You're regulated by local control. This middle group here is basically the small farms that do not have to certify, but they have to follow the rules. And then this lower group is those that have to annually certify. And so in Act 64, it was required that we define who is in for certification and who is not in for certification. And this is where we broke it. Legislature gave us this definition here, this 10 acres used for farming. They set that. And so from there, we had to determine the animal numbers. And we basically, there's numbers all across the board, but it is basically if you take an MFO and all those numbers and take 10% of that, that's where this bottom end number comes in. And then, of course, the top end for cows here is of a medium-sized farm. And there is the secretary can designate that certain groups or particular farms can come into certification. So if for some reason you're causing a major water quality issue, but you don't fall into the certification category now, he can pull you in and say, or she at that time, that you need to start certifying. You need to do a little bit more work in terms of, I'll show you the differences between the 2 groupings, that you have to start doing those things so that you can get into a better state of compliance. So this is what small farms that are certified have to do. The big key points here are the blue rather. So you have to report annually on a piece of paper, and the medium and large farms do this every year now. It's a piece of paper front and back. We'll definitely try and keep it simple. The inspection schedule, with the number of farms that would be coming in under this and the number of staff resources we have, we're setting it at 10 years. Certainly we would follow up on any complaints that we get, and farms that are more problematic would certainly get a few more visits than once in every 2 years. But that's where we think if you just do the straight math, that's sort of the balance, giving ourselves a little flexibility for the more challenging situations. And then everybody has to have a 590 nutrient management plan. And so that basically is the NRCS standard. And so as I mentioned, we've been going around to farms offering a review of what's going on your farm and what you need to meet the standards. Many of these small farms do need waste management structures or plans, and in order to get any cost share assistance for that, you have to have this 590 nutrient management plan. So that's why I said get in, go sign up by the 20th, and start the planning process, because you have to have a plan for where you're going to put the manure and waste if you're going to have an infrastructure improvement done to support that waste. And then education. That was really, really important to the legislature, was to make sure that farms were educated. Regulating people does not solve problems. Getting people to change their mindset and how they think daily is really much more beneficial. And so making sure that people were educated. When we went around the state and talked about the current AAPs that were then, most people didn't know about them. They said, this is new, where is this coming from? And the reality is that that's what drove, we need to make sure that we have these regular conversations so that you know what the rules are, so that no one's blindsided. And then there's also this, when you change ownership, and this exists for the medium and the large farms as well, but when you change ownership, you have to notify the Secretary of Ag that you've done that and that a new owner is in place. So that's right in the law. So this training that they said is all certified small farms and then all the permitted medium and large farms. And again, if you're not a certified farm and the Secretary requires you to become certified, you're going to have to start doing these trainings. And you have to get 4 hours at least every 5 years. And basically, most of your faces are familiar. You go to things like the UVM Extension has their field days, or the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. Those events, given that we work with them to make sure there's a little more curriculum put into it, that it meets the regulatory requirements, can be approved to meet that standard. So I don't think many people are going to be challenged as long as you're out there and getting educated. And some folks have asked us, what about online? What about other opportunities for people who cannot leave the farm? We'll certainly look into that. But I think in the very beginning, we're going to work mostly with partners to try and bolster some of the programs that already exist. So 590 nutrient management planning, again, it's at federal standard, and it's required for all the certified farms, the permitted farms. But everybody else in that small category still has to do some nutrient management work. You still have to take soil tests, you still have to take manure tests, and you still have to do reasonable application rates based on agronomic uptake, and keep records. Keep records. That's the most important thing. We've created a record-keeping booklet that's available online. Did we bring copies today? We did not. Okay. We'll make sure we get them to UVM Extension and to NRCS so that you can pick one up, but a guide to help you understand what we're looking for. The stacking of manure, we've heard a lot of feedback, so I'll give you some feedback that we've received on this one. We have challenges where piles like this, and even piles that literally look like mountains, don't move, and they may be in an inappropriate spot. And so we looked at Maryland's rule, and they basically require moving manure every 4 years. Or not coming back to the same spot every year for 4 years, and moving it within 180 days. Theirs is actually much shorter than that. We bumped it up to 180 days. To try and get at, manure needs to be utilized, composted, and put out into the field appropriately following a nutrient management plan, and not left where it isn't managed. And so there's also setback requirements. Some of these are increased, that most of them used to be 100 feet, and most of them went up to 200 feet. Many of the surface water and the wells, that's in statute, so that isn't something that we've changed. And then, of course, this has always been the standard that it cannot be in a floodway, which is where fast water moves when there's a flood. But we're also saying it cannot be in areas where flooding is likely to occur. Keep them up in the high ground, essentially. And soil health, we had to have recommendations for soil health. People have said they're confused. Why are there recommendations in something that's actually a rule? And the reason is that was the way the statute required us to require recommendations. But these are things that are absolutely clearly required, which is manage your gully erosion, which is basically this is classic, right? this is field-borne gully erosion, and you can manage it by changing your crop type, changing how you plow. If you have control within that field to manage it, you have to figure out what's the appropriate way to do that so that it can be managed. And then cover cropping on floodplains, so land that's subject to flooding. We're saying get it in early, either broadcast it by September 15th or drill it in by October 1st. This isn't on all lands, this is on flooding lands. And then Russell is something that everyone has always been required to do. Small farms used to have to meet 2 times the tolerable soil loss. Now everybody has to meet T. So small, medium, large, everyone has to meet the tolerable soil loss, which is calculated, and it's part of your nutrient management plan when you go get one of those. The waste and spreading applications. So the idea is that right now on the standard ban is right here, December 15th to April 1st. Everybody knows that, I think, at this point. But what we're talking about is on floodplains, expanding the ban so that no more manure is put down by October 15th, and then it cannot be put down until after April 15th, just within that 100 feet from the top of the bank on the floodplain. In addition to that, and so, well, the goal with this is that if you can apply manure in the field, but you can't do it within that 100 feet, can you just wait? Can you think about other fields and try and extend the time that the flooding risk is reduced, snowmelt is long gone, it's a better situation, less risk, because floodplains do have a higher risk because of that flooding. Can you wait till those risks have passed? The secretary can also, this was something that was given the year before, in statute, was to expand the ban. So right now, December 15th is the current date. He has the authority to move it up to December 1st. Or he has the ability to move it out to April 30th in any year. Now in the past, we've lifted the ban, where it's a beautiful spring or it's a really nice fall, we can lift the ban, but this is also saying you can expand the ban. So there's authority both ways now. And then the most important thing is, don't apply when there's a risk that it's going to run off, regardless of whether the ban's on or not. And that's this next standard, which is if there's known weather coming or the field conditions are such that it's going to release, it's very, very saturated. You shouldn't be on frozen or saturated soils anyways, but if you're out there and this happens, you have runoff from this field and it could have been predicted, then that's going to be the challenge in terms of a regulatory issue. So, Irene is a great example. Everybody knows Irene's coming. There are definitely times where there's 4 days of rain and it's 90% chance of rain every day. Those are the things that we're talking about, making sure that you protect and not do your field work then. When and where you can apply manure. So we've said that if your soil test phosphorus is greater than 20 parts per million, you cannot put manure. And basically that's excessive. That's beyond optimum, it's beyond high, it's excessive. And so we're saying that that's a point where you really need to think about that overall balance of where your manure is going on your farm. The other here is on slopes that are greater than 10%, you have to have at least 100-foot vegetative buffer between that slope and the water, and no manure goes in that buffer. And this is sort of aligned with the idea of CAFO has 100-foot setback concepts. And then again, I mentioned no fields that are saturated with water or that are snow covered. There still are seasonal opportunities for an exemption if you need an emergency situation. You've had, one of the common ones we've seen is a pipe freezes that transfers manure from the barn to the manure pit. They've got to drop down the manure pit so that they can access and do the work to get to the pipe. Completely understandable. We'll deal with how to take manure out of that pit and where to put it, and that it's most environmentally safe. Those are called emergency exemptions. But there's also now this opportunity where, if most of you may be aware of New York, they can spread manure in the winter, but they have to be part of their nutrient management plan. They have to be on fields that aren't really near water. We would certainly make sure there's wide buffer or setbacks from water, and then lower application rate, not really highly sloped land. So pre-selecting the fields in a nutrient management plan and incorporating that manure scheme into your planning process is now something we can do on a case-by-case basis. So a farmer could request this from the Agency of Ag. The buffer zones, right now, medium and large farms have 25-foot buffers on all surface waters, and the small farms have 10 feet. This is proposing to make them all 25. So it's not confusing of which size farm you are. All farms would be 25 feet from surface water. And then the big addition would be on a ditch. Arguably, is this a ditch or a stream? It's probably a stream that was ditched. I think Denise has a word for that. She calls it a stritch. There are several of these that exist out there. And there's this opportunity right now where if we can't all agree on what it is, it's either a ditch or a stream, it's either 25 feet or 0. And so now this is going to say if it's a ditch, it's 10 feet. And so now the discussion is, okay, well, we're not sure if it's a ditch or a stream. We'll watch it, and we'll make a determination. But in the meantime, you have to at least have 10-foot buffers on it. And then going forward, we may make the determination that that really does function as a stream. Because you have some of these ditches too. Keep in mind that with tile drainage, you've changed the watershed. And so some of these flows that are now going into these ditches are significant enough that they act like streams. So because something has always been a ditch, and that's in your mind, it's a ditch, the determination may be made if there's enough flow going into it now that it's acting like a stream, that it is a stream because of the size of the watershed that's now flowing into it. This also counts for roadside ditches. So roadside ditches need to be buffered by 10 feet, according to this. This is all draft, remember. We want your comments. One thing that's important to note that the secretary can do site-specific buffers. That was something that was put in the legislation. So for instance, it doesn't make sense to have a buffer there for whatever reason, right? There's a logical reason there's no need for a buffer there because the land slopes up or goes some other way. You can ask for a variance to not have these minimum buffer requirements there. On the flip side, if we determine that the minimum buffer isn't okay, it's not working right there, we can also say that needs to be wider. Mortality. So right now there are standards for burial and there are standards for composting, but it doesn't say anything about animals that just get left there. And so this concept is you have to either bury it or compost it or render it. We've seen animals just pushed over to the edge, which then is basically a swale, and that's not okay. We want to make sure they're away from water courses, so managing them appropriately. Exclusion standards. This is really not too much different from the medium and large farms. In the production area, no access to the stream, basically. You can cross a stream and you can drink from a stream, but you can't have unrestricted access to a stream, is essentially the standard. And in the pastures, where you have unstable stream banks, by having the livestock there, it only exacerbates it. So we're saying if there's unstable stream banks, keep the livestock off so that stream banks can find their equilibrium. And then, the secretary can also say this spot is just too sensitive for whatever reason. So there is also that language that was put in. One of the things that we've heard from the grazing community is that total restriction doesn't work, especially if they want to try and manage invasive species. And so what we have looked at is, Maryland again has this, they have 3 inches on all pastures, but we said in the area between the stream and where the fence would be, if you don't have a fence, if you're grazing that area, you need to make sure that you don't graze it all the way down. You leave at least 3 inches of vegetation there, so that way, and it's under a plan. You have a plan that's part of your process. It's a flash grazing. Manure, custom manure applicators, the training for this one is basically making sure you understand nutrient management. And so as someone who's coming onto another farmer's land and applying manure, making sure that you know how to read their nutrient management plan, that you make sure that it's up to date and that you follow it. So that way the farmer is given that protection that plan offers. And this certification would be for 5 years. A custom manure applicator can then train all their employees. All the employees don't have to go to the training, but the applicator can train the employees themselves, or they could send them, either way. And then you have to get 8 hours of training every 5 years. This is very similar to pesticide or CCA or any other credential as far as a professional license. And that's the presentation. So this is the email address where you can send your comments to. And then this is a website where we have a lot more information available. Any of these handouts, I know several people are trying to do education for others, so everything should be up there if you wanted to help spread the message. So now I'll open it for comments. I'm going to invite Jim Leland to come on up with me and help answer any of the comments that you have, as well as Chuck Ross. And we have